Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We are doing another color tutorial today. We are going to be taking my client from we were doing more of like a level 7 bronze, and so we wanted to still keep it really lived in, but we wanted to kind of brighten it up on the ends. So we are doing a little bit more of like a ashy, brighter for her, but still like kind of like a medium blonde type of result. She is naturally level 4 and she does have some grays, so I'm mixing up her base color. But we want to make sure that we don't like over blonde anything and make it like too icy. My goal for this is like a overall level like 8, or maybe like a darker ashy level 9 is what I'm thinking. So mixed up her root. She was a 4N, and then I mixed up the lightener, Oligo Blacklight Lightener, and I used 20 volume for my first bowl, and then I had to mix up a second bowl, and that one I did 30 volume. So I did quite a bit of basically the majority of the lightening that I had to do were like more tip outs, which I'll get into like how I did that later. But with that in mind and going over, yes, this hair is technically quote unquote pre-lightened. However, it really hasn't budged more than like the level 7. So I knew that I kind of needed the lightener to be have a little bit more oomph, if that makes sense. I knew that 10 volume wasn't going to really do the trick to start, and that would have taken forever to lift. She has got naturally thick hair, and her strands are pretty coarse too. So I have to start off pretty high anyway. Even with that, honestly, too, we had to move her to permanent color way sooner than I normally would have for like a standard gray placement like hers. Her grays really aren't that bad in terms of like the amount. However, they're just because her strands are coarse, her grays themselves are pretty resistant and they kind of wash up. Even with the permanent color, she was actually just telling me at this appointment that they kind of wash up a little bit faster. So we are going to give it one more go with this like standard color fusion permanent color. I don't like to move them to gray coverage permanent color unless I absolutely need to, because just the more opaque the permanent color, then the harder that is to eventually like lift out of the hair. And we normally don't. I think we've taken her all solid dark like once or twice. So I like to be able to have a little bit more flexibility with the color that I use on them in terms of lifting as much as I can. So anyway, I am applying this all over. As you see, I am doing this in a diagonal back motion. So my biggest tip anytime, even if I am just doing a root touch up, is always stay intentional with your placement. I almost always like to apply the color in a diagonal back to kind of give it that like shadow rooted effect. Even if we were just doing her roots today, I would still do that because it just kind of gives it a little bit more of a like intentional, expensive placement, if you will. And then once when the root was applied all over, then I went into brightening up her ends. So we kind of decided that overall we were going to more so neutralize everything. Like I said, we've been doing more of like a bronze kind of moment at like a level 6, 7. So I'm trying to take her to like we like more cooler tones on her with her features. So we were doing more of like a smoky, pearly level 7 all over, which I wanted to lighten her hair just a little bit for those more cooler tones to stick, even though we were still toning some pieces at a level 6, 7. And then we also decided that we wanted to have some pops of kind of more of like that brighter, like I was saying, like more of like that brighter but still level 8 ashy kind of blonde. So that's where I wanted to make sure the more smaller pieces that I'm taking, like right here, those are what I'm trying to get a little bit extra bright. And then you'll see me taking like larger sections for tip outs, and those are areas where I'm like I just want to kind of like buff out this old color and old warmth just so that I can basically colors like this. I'm saying all this to say sometimes you just need to get the hair lightened, and then you kind of attack the toning then later on, and the toning is where the color really comes together. While the foil placement is always really important, this is one of those where again, like I said, I just need all of the ends to be lighter. So I don't necessarily think you need to have like a true structured roadmapped game plan because we weren't really doing a money piece. We weren't having anything really high up top. I was bringing her placement up a little bit, but we don't really start any transitional pieces to start to even slowly brighten up until like around her temple area. So my main goal is I just want this to be lightened and I just want to make sure that it still blends so that there's not like a harsh line, of course. So with that, I always kind of suggest like do in cases like this, do what you need to do to get that there, if that makes sense, to get to where you want to be. So for me, I know with how I place color and with her having a little bit of a thicker density and a coarser texture, I still wanted to take some finer pieces so that I knew that some pieces got brighter than the others, but I also knew that I didn't have to take small sections and like essentially waste my time and spend extra time lightening that didn't necessarily need it. So what you see me doing right now is taking more like smaller standard TZ light sections, very, very low. Like I am starting my tease basically like 3/4 of the way, and I'm teasing all the way up until I meet where my base color ends essentially. And then I am adding a lot of like feathering in my blending just so that I know I don't have to shadow root later basically. And then what I do then, which is what you're about to see me do right here, is more so doing my more tip outs, which this piece that I'm taking right here is already a little bit more on the brighter side. So that's what was helpful, was that our past few colors that we were doing essentially added as like a first session without us realizing it for this type of color. But my more tip outs are areas where I'm like, I just need to lighten this so that I can put a toner on over it that's going to stick. Again, like I said, still make sure you back home, make sure that you have a blend, but don't be afraid to take larger sections. And especially when you know, I really just need to get her, the ends are like a faded 5 right now, where it's like more brunette. I have mixes of faded 5 and faded 7. The faded 7 I know is going to be great. The faded 5, as long as I can get that to like an 8 today, which is why I wanted to use 20 volume and move up to 30 for my second bowl, that's what my priority was. And you see me weaving in my dropouts, and I will weave the dropouts, and some of them I left, but then some places where I did weave, I still even tipped out the leftover weave of that just so that my sections wouldn't be like too big and I'd have spottiness. Plus then too, let's say if you weave and you leave like the parts that you pick up in that first weave, you kind of place that a little higher, and then your dropouts of the weave, you place that a little lower. That just gives like really stunning variation and dimension too. So that just is going to help for everything to be super like seamless later on. So that's where I feel like you can get really creative with these types of looks, honestly, so that you're not, because obviously the goal with this, while I want to have everything more so focused, I want the brightness be focused on the ends, but the last thing I want is for that like 2010 ombre, basically. So that's where it's going to be really beneficial to, even though we're not doing a money piece, that's why it's beneficial to still have some more finer TZ light sections. And I kind of say do some that are like the TZ lights, which are still like baby light sections that you just tease and you just place those lower. You don't place those as high as like maybe someone that wants a little bit of a higher placement. And then you do those tip outs, which for me, tip outs are typically thicker sections, and they're leave outs to the tip outs, or they're leave outs to what I didn't grab earlier. And, they're just more so to help prioritize getting more of like the coverage towards the ends, and look to your TZ lights as like those are the spots where you're kind of like bringing up the placement, if that makes sense. So we're doing like kind of like a highlight move up, if we will, and we're just adding lighter coverage all over, I guess is what I'm saying all that to say. So I do that all over, and she only needed a process for maybe, I don't know, 25-30 minutes after everything was applied all over. And I like to start off with the base color when it's great coverage. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do base colors with lightning, but obviously you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. I do prefer in placements like this though, where I know that I'm not placing, I intentionally, we weren't, I knew that the color wasn't going to be meeting up with the lightener. If I was doing like a high up blonde placement or just like a really high up any type of highlighting placement, and if I was scared that, especially for brunettes, it's not anything that's like like a level 7 or higher. If I'm doing a base color with highlights, it doesn't really give banding, but anything like level 6, especially like 5s and lowers, there's a high chance I might be meeting some banding while I am doing the base color and the highlights at the same time. So if I know that there's going to be a chance that there's going to be like maybe some areas where, there might be a little bit of banding, I either make sure that I use some type of like toner to neutralize that band at the bowl, or I will more so try to do roots at one appointment and then like highlights at the other, or have highlights primarily to like blend. You can also use maybe like more of like a 10-minute color at the bowl as a shadow root instead. There's other options, or I just try to be really intentional with my placement and place the highlights maybe like advise the client like, hey, I think just to prevent that band, we're gonna have to place the highlights a little bit lower. Luckily most of all of my base color clients are pretty chill, and I normally think of it as like if it's a base color and highlights, like highlights typically if you're placing them up high enough they're gonna blend anyway. So if you're looking for base color to fully cover it, then you kind of got to pick one basically. Otherwise, it's just not going to be like those like more softer looks that I feel like people are going for these days anyway. So really don't run into that issue hardly at all anyway, if I'm being completely honest. So about to start working on the back. In the back area, we are going to place these teasy lights just a little bit lower as well. Not really doing those like smaller teasy lights. I'm more so me doing strictly tip outs now here too. And again, that just helps to give that like typical natural effect where the sun, if this were to be naturally growing out overhead, which I mean, gosh, don't we all wish? Just those typical natural appearing balayages, you typically focus like your higher impact areas in the front and the sides, and in the back there's a lot more depth. So, with that, I am kind of mimicking that too. And again, that just prevents me from having to like over lighten. And I hope this kind of serves as a way that you kind of can do, again, more like full balayages if needed, but not everything needs to be, intense placements, that kind of stuff. And like, even though we did fully transform her color today, I think doing this took like maybe a little under an hour. And the reason why I even took an hour is because the first, I think 15 minutes I was applying her base color. So the actual balayage placement part really only took maybe 45 minutes. So not everything, and like I said, she's got really thick hair. So I think on someone with average hair, you could easily get this done in like 30 to 45. So let that serve as a reminder to you that, if you do kind of have like different placements in the back of your mind, not everything necessarily needs to be something that you take lots of sectioning with. As you guys can kind of see, I really just went off her natural part and when I'm applying highlights with base colors, I don't really like to go in and section out after I've applied that base color. I like to just section as I go. But I don't like to like pre-section with clips and all that stuff, because that just gives a chance for like the color to move around and for spotting to happen. So with that, whenever I am doing color with highlights at the same time, I normally do go about my placement a little bit differently. And with that too, like I said, that's actually kind of helpful because in cases like this, it doesn't take me nearly as long to get the highlights all applied, basically. So not everything needs to be 4-hour long appointments is what I'm saying all that to say. I think this took a little bit under 3. So at the shampoo bowl, we're going to rinse everything out, and depending on how porous the hair is and how dark you go, you do sometimes want to rinse with cooler water with fresh blonde ends. I will say always err on the side of caution. With thicker hair, I don't really notice it like bleeding into the blonde as much. So, I mean, I didn't use like hot water for this, but I definitely use like a comfortable, like maybe slightly warmer than lukewarm, just to, embrace the comfortability. Plus, too, since her base color was just 4N from Redken Color Fusion, which is like a neutral can be kind of a little bit more of a warmer kind of neutral. If I was using more of like an NA, like an ash base, I probably would have been a little bit more careful. But I knew that I haven't had any issues at all before with the color bleeding through her ends. So I always say, again, take a look. There are some clients I do have to wash them with cooler water that very first wash. I just make sure to get them like clarified really well, primarily to get the old color off and then to prep their canvas for toning. Especially with coarser hair, you want to make sure that there's a clean canvas and that there's no impurities in the hair, any buildup or anything like that, because already coarser hair is going to take a little longer for the toner to start to oxidize and develop. So you don't really want anything like kind of adding as like a shield over top of that too. And that's going to help their toner stay in. And again, like I keep saying, since we're doing more of like an ashier color, just want to be a little bit more mindful of that too. I did this off camera, but I did a treatment on her end while I detangled everything. So right now I am going to, like, while that's off, I towel dried her very well. And then I'm going to be going in with two different toners to just help to make sure that we are getting the most blend, but also too to help with that middle like typically your zone 2, especially where there's a little bit more fresher color at, it's not going to lighten up as well as the ends. Her ends got to a level 9, but then her mids got to like a level 7, 8, or no, honestly they probably got to truly like more of like a level 8 for the most part. But with what we were doing, like I said, I wanted to have more of like smoky pearliness, throughout her mids and some like the back part of her ends. And then we wanted just some pops of like more of like those level 8, more like brighter ashy colors. So what I did was through the back, and that back area that I highlighted last, that primarily got the like burst toner that I am applying in right now, which is Redken Shades EQ 6T and a little bit of 6N. And the 6T is perfect for like smoking out like level 8s. I love it. And then through the ends through the ends of the sides is where I applied her toner on the ends for like zone 3. And at basically anywhere that I kind of got to like a level 9 at. And that was Oligo Color Gloss 8GI and 8AI. If I were using Redken Shades EQ, I probably would have used more of like 8T, 8V, and a little bit of their 8GI too. But either way, these are my favorite toners for just like knocking out warmth without like overly mudding down, because that's what you need to be careful with doing these more like ashier colors on, especially like if you do have to pre-lighten beforehand, is just making sure that you're not like dulling down the color. You're still having some luminosity, which is why I like, more of the GIs for the level 8s and a little bit more of like the ends and the neutrals for the level 6s. And this is the end result straight. It looked so good. We were in love with it. This was the brightest I think that we had her for quite a while. And I was obsessed with how well it blended. And even though, again, I've like this kind of it just has a seamless melt, but it doesn't give like 2015 ombre at all by any means. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something new. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.